Prisoners were not getting any food. If they were getting any, it was one meal a day, that also rice diluted with water. The protesters were just scrambling for their lives. As opposed to just asking the president to resign, they started writing what they want and what they should have. They were definitely triggered and they were definitely ambushed by others. My name is Zara Mandviwalla Akbarally. I moved to Sri Lanka 4.5 years ago when I married my husband, who's a Sri Lankan. I've always had a deep, long history with Sri Lanka because my mother's side of the family is from there. So I've been going back and forth since I was a child. For me, Sri Lanka has always been a second home. Before I get into the economic meltdown and what's actually happening in Sri Lanka today, and what the core values of the Sri Lankan people are, that is their warmth and how accommodating they are in nature. They generally have more happiness, less hunger, better gender equality, less wealth inequality. You wonder how in such a short span of time the people have suffered and there's been so much misery and desperation by the people.
श्रीलंका में मुजाहिरीन ने सदारती महल पर धावा बोल दिया। मुजाहिरीन ने फौरी तौर पर श्रीलंकन सदर के इस्तीफे का मुतालबा किया है।
मुजाहिरीन सदारती महल में रुकावटें तोड़ते हुए दाखिल हो गए।
7 के करीब हलाकतें हो चुकी हैं, जिसमें 2 अरकान पार्लियामान भी शामिल हैं। 225 लोग जख्मी हुए हैं।
Basically, Sri Lanka ran out of dollars, and this led to high inflation. This led to a lot of people having no food, no fuel for most, including myself. We had to resort to other ways like walking and cycling, electricity outages for 13 hours at an end. And Sri Lanka is not equipped, even the wealthy don't have generators. So this was the situation of the people in Sri Lanka from such a high happiness level country to what it got to at the moment. So people were desperate. That's why the peaceful protest started. Government declared a state of emergency and people were panic buying food, and a lot of people who had come to Colombo to work couldn't get back because they had put curfews in place, and they had done this to kind of deter a mass protest. So I actually had front view vision of the revolution from my balcony because that's where the protest site was happening. These protests were, people used their voice, their social media and their art to protest. So there were art installations, my friends were involved in theatre performances, there were rappers and musicians. One day where they actually used a projector to project slogans of the hashtags that they were using for the protest onto the Secretariat building. Language, sect, religion, class, all these divides just vanished. Everyone was suffering in their own way. Sri Lanka only came in the news, even on Bloomberg, once the violence erupted. When they were in the Secretariat building, they actually converted into a library for people to kind of come and take tours. But what you've seen in the media was triggered and ambushed by not any of the peaceful protesters. So even in the President's Secretariat building and even the Prime Minister's home, when people had occupied it, just sat around the conference table, mimicking politicians. That was the form of protest. No civilian was ever touched by the peaceful protesters. Sri Lanka was still open for tourism. Colombo, yes, was a little difficult to get to and from places with the massive fuel queues and a shortage of a lot of things, but all the people wanted to show was that they had power and they would not be abused and taken advantage of anymore. So when these protesters were ambushed at Golfers Green, which is right in front of me, by tear gas and water cannons, the protesters were just scrambling for their lives for the tear gas not to affect them. So yeah, a lot of people I know did get hurt. They said that their body was on fire and they were burning for a short period. The most famous political slogan was "Gota, go home," which people started chanting. Gota is the ex-president, so it was to ask him to resign. And then things followed about of the amenities that people didn't have, being no food, no water, no fuel. The placards became more informative. They started demanding their rights. So as opposed to just asking the president to resign, they started writing what they want and what they should have. So it was interesting to see how it became, more informed and more detailed, because the people understood what they should have. People continued to stand within those storms when lightning was hitting those little camps that they had created, because people were actually sleeping in that model village. They were kind of sleeping, and that had become their home from April till now. Of course, now it's died down a lot, but they didn't let any of that get in their way. The camps were destroyed with the storms, but they rebuilt them. Umbrellas flew away, the few food stalls were also destroyed, but they rebuilt them, overnight. So that was the determination and resilience of these people. The most beautiful part was the unity of the people, how I felt so a part of all of this, how I felt like I was actually a part of this change. Of course, it was tens and thousands of people, but that little contribution was also something. People, especially the young and youthful urban population, will no longer stand being taken for granted. And there has to be good governance and an equitable distribution of benefits, because people can see through this now and they will not stand for anything else but their rights being respected. Pakistan also has a lot to learn from this. I hear people saying all the time that we don't want to end up like Sri Lanka. But in fact, this revolution happened in front of me. Not only that, I was a part of it. And I think the world should learn that, especially today's urban, youthful population who's sensible, will not be taken for granted anymore. And, there has to be an equitable distribution of benefits now.